Hi, I'm Justin Hamilton, and you're listening to my interview with Elaine Goodman on gogoodman.com.au.
It certainly is not a dirty word. Welcome back to the Elaine Gogoodman Show. There's two other dirty words that I want to share with you, two other non-dirty words that I want to share with you. They are Justin Hamilton, who is on the line now. Justin, thank you very much for calling in today, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, no, that's good. You know, it could be a dirty word depending on who you talk to, my name. So, you know, we'll leave it open to the listeners.
Let's avoid those people.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the earliest memory you have of comedy having an effect on you?
I reckon it was probably the Kenny Everett show.
Oh, that's a new answer that I haven't heard before. Yeah.
I remember Kenny Everett had a huge influence on me as a kid. I remember watching him on the ABC, and I just used to find his show hilarious. I just thought it was the best show. But I think it was all ABC related. I think it was also The Goodies was probably the earliest comedy I can remember. But Kenny Everett was definitely.
Excuse my ignorance. The name Kenny Everett. I haven't heard that name before. Who was Kenny Everett?
Oh, well, Kenny Everett was a UK DJ who ended up with a show on the BBC, and I think it was the BBC. And he was just really funny. He'd do lots of sketches. He had ongoing characters. He used to have guests on that he was completely rude to, and he was just this very funny camp man who thrived when I was back in the I think he was around in the 70s and 80s, and he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But he was just really funny. Just lots of sight gags, and used to have a dance troupe on the show called I think they were called Hot Chocolate, and it was one of those things where when the dancing would happen, you'd always be a bit frustrated because you'd be thinking, I want to get back to the comedy. So that's probably the first time that I'd really gotten my head around it. Was he
meant to be funny, or was he just more being stupid?
Yeah.
Or
No. He was meant to be funny. He was really funny. He was, he played the characters. That's how he got his own TV show, because he was funny on radio. So, but it was just more like a variety show, and that you would have these dancers that would appear now and again. And I think maybe now that I'm older and I appreciate the opposite sex a little bit more, maybe I would enjoy Hot Chocolate a little bit more than I did when I was a kid.
Oh, so you probably shouldn't have been watching that show.
No.
Was it a late night show?
No, it was it was on around 6:30. So it was definitely a variety show, but it definitely had adult content. But it was stuff that just flew over my head at the time.
Now you can think back to it I could get some ideas from this.
Yeah, definitely. He was fantastic.
Was comedy always the dream career for you?
No, not in the slightest. I kind of stumbled into it. I wanted to be a writer, and I'd written a lot of short stories, and I'd won a couple of competitions in high school, that kind of thing. And my mum ended up doing some work. She used to work at Community Aid Abroad in Adelaide, and she did some promotional work with the Doug Anthony All-Stars. And so I got to meet those guys from a pretty young age. And seeing them live was unbelievable. I'd never really seen anything like it before. And Richard Fidler actually read some of my short stories and said they were funny, and he said I should give comedy a go because, you can spend 3 years writing a novel and shipping it about and nobody can get back to you, and you can not get any better. You can just not have any idea of what's going on. Whereas, you come up with an idea for a joke, invariably you can find a place to do it that night and you can find out if it works or not. So, and it turns out that when he said that, I was thinking, well, it's easy for you to say. You're in the Doug Anthony All-Stars. But 21 years later, it seems to have worked out okay.
When you look back at those stories, if you've still got them, do you find them funny?
Yeah, I think they're pretty inventive, and there's definitely a comedic element to the majority of them. It's funny going back on the old stuff. It's as soon as you read it, you can kind of work out. If I haven't looked at where it's come from age-wise, as soon as I read it, I can kind of work out through the storytelling devices or the characters or the hints of it, what was influencing me at the time. And then you can go back further and go, okay then. I obviously had just seen The Empire Strikes Back, or you're kind of mimicking what you're seeing on the big screen or in other novels, etc.
You started your stand-up career in 1994 in a duo with your schoolmate Damien. What are the advantages and disadvantages of being in a comedy duo as opposed to performing solo?
Oh right, well he wasn't my schoolmate. He was a guy that I played basketball with. We used to play against each other, and then we ended up getting along quite well. And we ended up playing on a team together. So, and then I lost contact with him for a while, and then I was working at a hotel when I was about 19, and he started the next night, and so we just started. We just got along really well. We had very similar senses of humour, and we just mucked around a bit. And I think it's great starting off in a duo because every experience that comes your way, you've got someone to share it with, whether it's a good experience, whether it's a bad experience. It's nice to have someone alongside you that you can discuss things. And also, I don't know if I was really that interested in getting on stage at that point, but Damien was more the one who was encouraging of it. And, maybe I would have found my way to the stage later, but definitely at that point, I felt like he had a little bit more of the get up and go with it.
What was the aim, the duo? You named the duo the Bunta Boys.
Bunta. Bunta is a South Australian Aboriginal word for crazy, and is a word that's used quite a lot around Adelaide.
And you seem to do some quite, I guess, risque stuff or outrageous stuff. Did you have an aim for the duo? Did you know where you wanted to get, or was it just for fun? I guess the aim was to be paid on a regular basis. I guess that's the main aim of all comedians. But we just liked just putting things together and being quite inventive and funny. Because we started off in Adelaide, we didn't have a really strong scene that was influencing us. So, we started off at the same time as Limo and Mickey D, who started a few years after us, who lives in the UK now, Dave Williams, who lives in Sydney. But it was a young scene. So we found that our influences came from TV and movies. So we'd come to Melbourne, and there'd be lots of young comedians who were sounding like Anthony Morgan or Greg Fleet or Judith Lucy. But we were being influenced by, The Late Show with the D Generation and The Big Gig. So we kind of couldn't really work out what the difference between live and TV was. We used to write a new 10 minutes every week for months on end, and then when we got to do our first feature, which was after 2 months of doing the open mic spots, we took some of our best songs, but we wrote a whole new half an hour because we thought that's what you did. You just wrote new stuff all the time, and it wasn't until we started touring that we went, wait a minute, you can do some of the stuff that you really like more than once, which was a real breakthrough. For different crowds.
Yeah, exactly. It's exciting to,
oh, God.
And stuff only gets better the more you do it. So, that was a real eye-opener for us.
Were you influenced by, I guess, the American scene at all, or was it more Australian? Because in the 70s and 80s, as you'd know, America had a big influx of comedians coming through, and a lot of them went into acting. Were you aware of that, or were you more interested in the local scene?
I think we were all over the place, actually. I personally was a huge Woody Allen fan, so there was definitely an element of that. But that didn't really translate for us to the duo. I think it was probably more British, actually. I think we were more influenced once again by TV and things like the Blackadder. Especially the second and third series, the dynamics between, Rowan Atkinson and Hugh Laurie, that kind of helped inform what we were doing on stage. And then it was more the local stuff as well. So, yeah, I think and the Young Ones was a massive influence on us as well. So it was, we were leaning a little bit more to that English sensibility.
And that English humour is a lot more, I guess, physical, more visual humour, which you started off with as well, and that must have been your influence. When did your style change into more of a storyteller? Was that when you went single?
Yeah. That was definitely, once I started doing the solo thing, I put on, so the Bunta Boys broke up at the beginning of 99.
Was that a clean breakup, or was that a bit of a nasty, good breakup?
Yeah. Yeah, like, my partner was getting married and, they wanted to have kids. And I think the idea of travelling, like, once you're, if you want to live in Adelaide, you're going to have to travel a lot to make your career work. And I just don't think he was up for that, which was completely fair enough. And after 5 years, that's a long time to be out at night and on the road, etc. So that was a very clean break. And then I took a few months off, and then so I started performing strictly solo stand-up around August 99. And then I put on my first solo show in 2000 at the Adelaide Fringe. And that was, that started me, I guess that's where the Woody Allen influence started to come through, watching those types of movies like Manhattan and Annie Hall. And that stuff structurally was very appealing. And so that's where I started to move more into the storytelling side of things.
The late 90s, early 2000s, when you became a solo artist is the best term for it, was a great period in Australia for comedy. We had a variety of TV shows for comedians to perform on, and there were a lot of radio shows, and there still are a lot of radio shows for comedians to work on or make appearances on. And there was also a lot of live venues for comedians to perform, as there are now, for comedians to perform at. Judging by the amount of Australian comedians that are still prominent from that period, you mentioned a few just before, would you judge it as a good period for Australian comedy?
Well, I think it was interesting because we had some real trailblazers coming along, not only with Judith, Fleety, and Morgan, but we also had
like Husey, Peter Hellier, those kind of guys.
Well, no, but before those guys, we had Sue-Ann Post, who was a fantastic comedian. You had Rachel Berger. You had some real talent coming through, and you'd see, we kind of, we kind of looked down our noses at Hey It's Saturday, but I saw quite a few really good pub comedians there. Pub is, and pub's not derogatory. Like, they're really good live comics. People like the late great Dave Grant and Brad Oakes and people like that. So what that did was they kind of paved the way and showed the possibility of being able to make a living out of it. And then from there you had everyone from the Roves to the Will Andersons to the Helliers to the Hugheses, Corinne Grant, Michelle Laurie, all of those guys started coming through and really making a name for themselves out there in the public.
Were you getting nervous around that time? If you were the generation before the Roves or the Peter Helliers, not the generation, but a few years before, like Rove, Peter Hellier, Husey, were you getting nervous that there were so many coming through?
No, I've never really looked at anyone else's career and thought anything of it. Like, I've always just been doing my own thing.
I know a lot of the comedians help each other out, but are there ever like oppositions in comedy?
I'm sure there is. I know that there's definitely people who like to get uncertain of where they stand, and then what that does is manifest itself in myriad ways. But personally, I've always just been doing my own thing, so I've been pretty lucky, actually. I feel like if I was in the X-Men, my mutant ability would be the ability to not care about what anyone else is doing and just concentrate on what I'm doing.
Is that a good way to look at it, or do you find that other people are aware of what's going on around them and they work it a different way?
Oh, well, I guess I'm sure some people do. I'm sure some people do see it as more competitive and, but so that might work for some people, and I think it would not work for some people. I think for the most part, if you're concentrating on what other people are doing, then, you're not working on your own stuff.
You started getting some TV gigs in the early 2000s on Spicks and Specs, Rove Live, The Glass House, Good News Week. How important was getting on TV for you in order to take your career to the next step?
Yeah, well, the thing is that, I think here people kind of gauge your success as to what you're doing on TV or radio. And it's funny, there's a lot of comedians out there that make a really good living from telling jokes who have never appeared on TV. So I guess it does broaden your appeal because more people can see you at once. And then I guess it is nice because, the people who see you on Good News Week and are really excited about it are sometimes, not always, but sometimes the people who ask you if you're going okay with your career because they haven't seen you on it. So as soon as they see you on it kind of makes them feel a little bit more relaxed. So I guess that's probably the best way that it works. But, it was important. It was important to get out there and get to meet some new people. And, I've got to say, out of all the TV that I've done, I feel like Dirty Laundry Live is probably my favourite because it is actually live, and it feels the closest to normal performing, I guess. So, it's definitely a good opportunity and good to get your face seen now and again in a different light.
That's a good point that you said. The public gauges how successful a comedian is by how much they've appeared on TV. But then now you look at these comedy specials that are coming out through Netflix. With Gabriel Iglesias has made a career out of doing stand-up. He's never really done TV or movies that much. You look at Bill Burr's another one that another comedian told me about, and he's really good. And he's done a special on Netflix, and he's travelled the world and done stand-up. You look at guys like Akmal, who's never really cemented a spot on TV, but they all seem pretty successful, but they really haven't had a lot of, I guess, airtime. Is it hard without the airtime? It's just a different type of challenge. It's like sometimes you can get the airtime and it can change your. Suddenly you've got a completely different audience coming to see you perform, and then, possibly that can throw what you want to do. Suddenly you're trying to, maybe you're on some mainstream Channel 10 show, and then suddenly you're getting a more mainstream audience coming to you, which therefore might be a bit more difficult to get certain ideas across. But, it just, it all leads to different approaches, and, it does make things very interesting. Like, one of the things I'm mostly grateful about is I don't drive, so I catch a lot of public transport, and I have enough of a profile that I'm recognised in relationship to comedy, but I can catch the tram and not be hassled, and that to me is the sweet spot. Is that a gauge for you? Like, are you making enough money? Are you making a living off comedy? You're happy?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
yeah, it's all working out quite nicely. But I think the day that people start pointing at me on a tram, I'll have to do something to dial it back.
Get multifocal glasses so they go black when you're in the sunlight and people won't recognise you.
Right, I've already got them. I'm ready to go.
That leads on actually pretty well to my next question. When do you think you started getting noticed?
Oh, I just honestly have no idea. It's a bit hard to gauge that actually because, because I ran a couple of comedy rooms in Adelaide. One was at PJ O'Brien's, which I ran with Limo in early 2000 to about 2003, roughly. But I also got the comedy up and running at the Rhino Room, which still runs today. So I was kind of, in Adelaide, it's not the biggest of cities, and then so therefore, I was kind of recognised around there. But on a more, I don't know, national stage, I don't really know. Actually, that's a good question. I have no idea. I think maybe after I do. Well, here's the story for you. I do remember being back in Adelaide.
Or do you want to save the story? Because we'll go to a quick sponsorship announcement. Do you want to save the story till after the break?
Yes, sounds good.
So I don't send the station bankrupt.
No. Get that money up there.
Okay, cool. We'll be right back on the Elaine Gogoodman Show. We've got plenty more with Justin Hamilton. It's 21 minutes past 3. Welcome back to the Elaine Gogoodman Show. And we're just talking about, just off air, the footy. And being from Adelaide, you're an Adelaide Crows supporter.
Yes, I am.
So they're going through a bit of a rough time at the moment. But Adelaide versus Port Adelaide, there should be there's going to be some strong supporters there. So it'll be good to get that match out of the way for both clubs. Yeah,
well, it's the first match back in for the Crows back in Adelaide since the terrible situation with Phil Walsh, and playing against Port, who he also had strong ties with, regardless of the result. I think that's pretty good for the two clubs to be playing each other in this game.
Now, you were about to tell a story about getting noticed.
Oh yeah, so when I lived in Adelaide, I told you previously about how I worked at a hotel, and the hotel was in North Adelaide, and just down the road from there was this cafe called the Blue and White Cafe that I used to frequent, and I had not been there for maybe close to a decade since I'd moved, and I just didn't really find myself in North Adelaide that often. And I was, this was a couple of years ago, I thought, I'll go in, and it was Saturday night. I was with a couple of friends. We thought, we'll pop in and see if it's still the same people running it. And I walked in, and not only is it exactly the same people running it, but they look like, when they make people look older in TV shows and all they do is just grey their hair a little bit. It's exactly what they look like. And I've walked in and pointed at them and said, hey, and they've looked at me and gone, oh my God. And I was like, well, what? And they pointed to the TV, and they'd just been watching me on Good News Week. So that was a very funny exchange to kind of walk in and for me to be able to go, oh my God, it's still you guys, and them to be there exactly, like 30 seconds beforehand saying, I wonder whatever happened to Justin. Oh, there he is on the TV.
That wasn't the Good News Week episode that I saw a clip on YouTube of, where you had to do that weird, with that cook had the pancake and...
Yeah, the mime.
Was that it? Was that the episode?
I don't know. I can't quite remember which episode it was, but that would be even funnier if it was that one. That's a hell of a way to make an entrance, I think.
Now, you've selected a video. One thing I like to do when I get comedians on the show is get a feel of what comedy they like by getting them to select a short video from YouTube that interests them. You've gone with Stuart Lee talking about his interview with Ang Lee, the Hollywood director. Now, who's Stuart Lee? Give us a little bit of a background on him.
Oh, well, Stuart Lee is a brilliant UK comedian. He's been around for a long time now, and he started off in the era of alternative comedy, and he's an amazing intellect and a very funny man. He's also written a book entitled How I Escaped My Certain Fate, which for anyone who's interested in stand-up comedy or thinking that maybe they would like to get into it, that's a must-read. It's got 3 scripts in it and annotations as to how he came up with those routines. But I saw this routine live when he was last here, which is a while ago now. And I thought it was fantastic. It's not only funny, but you can also learn about structure from it and pacing and delivery. And it's definitely one of my favourite routines by any comedian.
So we'll talk a little bit about it after we listen to it. Stuart Lee talking about his interview with Hollywood director Ang Lee.
That's fine. So I was really excited to interview Ang Lee about the Hulk, and because he'd made the film. But when I interviewed, I try and make a little joke to put them at ease, So I rang him up. He was in New York. I was in London. And I said to him, Ang Lee, you have directed the Hulk film. You must be very excited and proud. But don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. then there was a long, embarrassed pause, and then Ang Lee said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And I said, "Ang Lee, you've directed the Hulk film. You must be very excited and proud, but don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when I'm Ang Lee." And there was another kind of silence, and then Ang Lee said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" And I said, "There's no need, it was just a stupid joke." And he went, "No, what did you say?" And I said, "Ang Lee, you've directed the Hulk film. You must be very excited and proud, but don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when I'm Ang Lee." And he didn't say anything. And I said, "I expect loads of people have made that joke to you." And he said, "No. No one's ever said it before. Why did you say it? Why?" And I said, "Well, Ang, you know the Hulk film?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "Well, in that, Bruce Banner, he's the Hulk. He says, 'Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.' And your name's Ang Lee, and you directed it." So I said, "Don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Because Ang Lee sounds a bit like angry." And Ang Lee said, "No, it doesn't." And I said, "Come on, Ang. To be fair, Ang Lee does sound a bit like angry." And Ang Lee said, "No, it doesn't. Ang Lee is a completely different word to Ang Lee." And I said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" And Ang Lee said, "Yes, Ang Lee is a completely different word to Ang Lee." And I said, "I don't understand what point you're trying to make, Ang Lee. What I'm saying, if you listen, is that angry sounds a bit like Ang Lee. So if you swap them round, people can see there's a slight change. There's some sort of joke there. Ang Lee, what you're saying, is actually the same word as Ang Lee. If you swap those two words round, no one would notice the difference. It wouldn't work." But that's not what you appear to be saying, is that Ang Lee is a completely different word to Ang Lee. But it isn't. They're the same thing. And I can't understand. It's very simple, the joke I'm making. I can't understand how you've got into this kind of fix. And then he went, "Oh, I get it," he said. "Is this a joke about me having a Taiwanese accent?" And I was mortified. I went, "No, it never even occurred to me that you would think that. It's just a simple thing about the words, the syllables, Ree and Lee, sounding the same. My own surname is Lee. I've had 36 years of fun with that syllable. I know what I'm talking about. I can't see why you would begin to think." And he went, "No, you're anti-Taiwanese." And I went, "I'm not. I don't even know where Taiwan is. I've got no interest in it." It's made it worse, to be honest. Then he got you on, and he got like a lawyer on from Universal, and I had to shouting at me, so I had to get my editor on from the paper to stick up for me. We ended up having this kind of four-way argument. It went on for ages. He's going, "You're anti-Taiwanese." She was saying, my editor's going, "No, he isn't. There's no history of anti-Taiwaneseness at all." And there was like this thing, and Ang Lee started shouting at me about it. And I went, "Well, I can't see what your problem is. Why don't you just listen to the joke? It's obvious." Then in the end he went, "Don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." And I said, you've proved my point, you fucking Taiwanese idiot. He said, don't call me that. He got another bloke on, an advisor. I had to get someone else on. The publisher, there's like a 6-way, 2-hour debate going on. In the end, we argued for so long that Ang Lee missed his 2:30 dentist appointment. That's the time that he goes to the dentist, Glasgow. Don't let him tell you any different. He doesn't even need to write it down. They offer him an appointment card, he rejects it. He says, I'll remember it by thinking about my own pain.
That's the clip that Justin Hamilton selected. Brilliant clip, and it just keeps climbing up and up towards the pinnacle at the end. So why did you pick that clip?
As I was saying before, the structure of the routine is fantastic, and his performance of it is second to none. You know, there is just that beautiful building of tension and, also a sense of hopelessness, which is, you don't feel like it's going to be resolved in any way that is going to be satisfactory. And watching someone who is, an intellectual giant like Stuart Lee in that scenario is very funny. Also, it's, I think it also just relates to that very basic, we've all been in situations where we have said a joke that has not gone down well. And so it's also relatable. It's not just that he's speaking to a well-known director. He could have been talking to, the postman and said something that he thinks is going to be funny and it not working out. So the premise is not only clever, but it's also got something that we can identify and know that we've been in those situations ourselves.
When you talk about structure of a joke, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's he sets up the premise of the joke very simply, and then he then gives you the inciting moment, which is, he makes the joke, which he thinks is going to be a throwaway joke. Before he gets into the interview, he just thinks it's going to be something that's amusing for Ang Lee. And once he's amused him and probably won him over, then he'll get into the interview. But because Ang Lee doesn't get the joke and doesn't like the joke, it's just so the setup is then just leads you into this mad scramble to try and find some leverage, and that he's just trying to get everything back on track so he can continue the interview. So the structure of setup, and then from the setup to the inciting moment, and then the rest of it is just like a sprint to the finish line as to see how that's going to work itself out.
Is that how you write jokes?
It just kind of depends on what the routine is or what the story is, and I'll make I kind of approach things. Every routine seems to have a different life of its own. So, but I have learnt from that and tried to apply that to routines in the past, definitely.
You've been doing the Adelaide Fringe Festival, which is in your hometown, and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival since the early 90s. What have been some of the big changes or developments in Australian comedy since then, in your opinion?
Well, it's definitely social media. Social media's had a massive impact on the way, the festivals have worked. It's, once upon a time you had to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on street press to pay for advertising, and then hope that they'll give you an interview, and then hope that they'll review your show, and then on top of that, hope they give you a good review. And you could be paying anywhere between $250 and $1,000 in the off chance to create some publicity for your show. But now with social media, if you're diligent and active, you can create your own audience, and you can bypass all of that, which has been pretty amazing to watch. Once upon a time you couldn't even get street press on the phone, and now every year they get in touch with me asking if I want to advertise through them. So it's that's been from the behind the scenes, that's been the biggest impact, I think. And then once again, watching comedians perform now, I think because of, once again, it's getting back to technology, because of YouTube, stand-up is much more ubiquitous in everybody's homes, and you're seeing a lot of Australian comedians come up through the ranks who aren't influenced by local acts. They're looking at you mentioned earlier, the Bill Burrs and the Louis C.K.'s and the Paul F. Tompkins overseas, and they're kind of learning their skills that way. So that's been quite interesting. And from an audience's point of view, because they're seeing more stand-up on YouTube, etc., when they go along to a live gig, audiences can get kind of shirty if people are heckling or making noise, or once upon a time that was just kind of accepted. But it's fascinating to sometimes watch audience members get angry with other audience members because they're getting in the way of their enjoyment.
How would you describe your style of comedy? You seem, from what I've seen you a few times at the Comics Lounge, and I've watched quite a few of your clips on YouTube, what's available. Your technique, you seem to repeat key words a lot, and let's say you put a lot of emphasis on emphasis. Is that part of your technique?
Yeah, it's, I guess it's definitely, more of a storytelling style that I, try to do on stage. And, sometimes emphasizing key points, it's good for, later in a show or later in a routine when you want to come back to that. You've just tried to get it drummed into people's heads, or, sometimes just repeating things is funny. It's like one line in particular from this year's show. I remember talking about how at the start of the year, New Year's Eve, I made the New Year's resolution of, just to be on top of things and be a better guy and be a better version of myself. And I list all these positive things I'm going to do. And then the next line was 7 minutes into 2015. And then I'd repeat that 7 minutes into 2015, which really emphasizes to the audience, it was New Year's Eve. He's made a New Year's resolution to be better, and it's 7 minutes in, and he's already coming up against his first hurdle. So that kind of is, kind of gets people, not only is it, hopefully funny, but it also raises the stakes.
You also have a podcast called Can You Take This Photo, Please? Now, I've heard you tell this story on a YouTube video before for another podcast. What's the story behind this title?
Oh, it was just it was me mucking around, actually. I've got quite a few friends who have massive profiles, like a Will Anderson and a Rove McManus. And, what would happen is if you're out and about, we'd be hanging out and we'd be talking, and not always, but now and again you'd have people just step in front of you to talk to Rove or Will or whoever it was. And then they would turn around and they'd ask me, "Oh, can you take this photo?" And so I had said as a joke that would be the name of my autobiography. And then it was like, actually, no, I actually quite like that as a title. So I decided to own it and use it.
That's a funny story. Last year, I don't know if you've heard of him, I interviewed an actor called Fred Stoller. You've heard of him?
Yeah.
And he's been in something like 100 different TV shows he's made cameo appearances in. And the name of his autobiography, which I've got at home, is called Maybe We'll Have You Back. Because he just can't get a regular part on a show. He's just he's just known as a character actor and just jumps from show to show.
That's funny. That's yeah. Well, maybe we can team up.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, so it's along those lines of that kind of rejection comedy.
Yeah, that's funny.
Do you get recognised now instead of your high-profile friends?
Oh, it's funny. Like the people who listen to the podcast. They're so funny. They'll do things like sometimes if they'll see me out with these guys, they'll ask them to take the photo. or they get really excited at the prospect of me taking the photo, and then they will tag me in it, saying, "Oh, Justin Hamilton took this photo." So that's I quite enjoy both of those. I like either one.
And for your podcast, you interview a lot of comedians and ask them pretty much what I'm asking you now about your different style and influences. Who have been some of your favourite interviews and why?
Sydney comedian Ben Elwood is one of my favourites. I just think he's a really interesting guy. He's a good talker, and I often find when we've, sat down and had a chat, it's often one of those things where you look down at the time and you go, oh my God, that's nearly an hour already, and haven't even really hit the halfway mark of things that I was interested in talking to him about. But because he's a thinker and a good talker, I always enjoy. I enjoy spending time with him. But when I get him on the podcast, he's always got an interesting take on everyday life. But I feel like he's my favourite guest on a regular basis. Tony Martin's been fantastic. Tony tells all these brilliant stories from throughout his career, and he's led such an interesting life. And it's always funny that afterwards he'll always be like, "Oh, was that okay?" And it's like, "That was better than okay. That was pretty fantastic." So Tony and Ben are two of my favourites for certain. But sometimes it's the lesser known acts. Like a Tom Gleeson and a Will and Hellier. All those guys bring really good stories. But sometimes it's nice talking to the people that you might not know quite as well. Whether it was like a Bev Killick, who I thought her interview was a really interesting one, and then there's been younger comedians that people might not be quite across. People ranging from up in Sydney, like Jen Fricker and Becky Lucas and those kinds. And I sometimes the lower the profile, the more interesting it can be, I think.
The podcast is a really big tool, especially in Australia for comedians to, I guess, get out there a little bit, because there aren't many spots on TV to get out there. How important, or do you remember when the podcast became a thing?
Yeah, well, I remember Tommy Dassolo talking to me about it a long time ago, and he, I think he first put me onto Mark Maron's podcast. I'd been on the Box Cutters podcast. I'd been a guest on that a couple of times, but I didn't quite really understand how it worked, and I kind of thought of it more as a radio show. But that was definitely the first podcast up in Australia that I knew of that was popular. And then so Dassolo had talked to me about it. I listened to a bit of Maron, and around that time, the Little Dum Dum Club got up and running, and Steele Saunders just after that started I Love Green Guide Letters, and the Tofop, the Will Anderson and Charlie Clausen one got up. So it was kind of exciting to see all of these things coming out all at once. And once again, it's a great medium that you can be in complete control of, and you can kind of do whatever you want to do, and that's quite liberating.
Did it come about because there was no other place, either on radio or TV, for comedians to really get out there in Australia? Was it established because of, I guess, desperation for comedians to get their name out there, or did it just come naturally?
No, I think it just came naturally. I think I think technology just improved to an extent that you didn't have to go into a studio to record. That's what you had to do in the past, and you could or you could buy really expensive equipment, and then suddenly everything. Once technology takes a leap forward, everything suddenly becomes quite cheap, and so I think it just lent itself naturally to comedians who are used to creating their own content, whereas, I don't think you see many actors bringing out podcasts because, for the most part, they work off other people's scripts, but comedians, we create our own stuff, so it was just another outlet, and, I think once we saw that outlet was there, we jumped at the opportunity.
You've also performed at the Sit and Spin in Seattle, which I'm guessing is that tall, thin building with the big kind of spaceship-looking top that I've seen in Frasier, and the prestigious Gershwin Room in New York. What was your impression of the American crowd and the comedy scene over there?
Oh, that was such a long time ago. It's
still on Wikipedia.
Yeah, right. Nice one, Wikipedia. I just... all a bit of a blur, actually. Like, that was 99. I remember the Seattle gig. We ended up having a few. We ended up getting pretty hammered, actually. To be honest, after that gig, that was a really fun one. I really enjoyed Seattle. The Gershwin was
what you can remember of it.
Yeah. The Gershwin. Oh God, that was such a long time ago that I just remember. I remember being on quite late, and it was late in the bill, as it were. And I was still that was in between the Buntas finishing up and me actually starting stand-up properly. So it was more of a feeling out process. So I don't, both experiences were fine, but it's hard to put much stock in it because I wasn't quite certain exactly what I was doing at that point for myself.
Now, this is a question I like asking all comedians. We've touched on it a little bit already before. Currently in Australia, we don't have a commercial TV slot where comedians can go and promote themselves or perform, apart from The Project, which is like a 3-minute thing because they pack so much into the hour. Is this a big issue when you compare it to the amount of talk shows in England and the USA?
I don't know. I don't really tune into the TV side of things that much. Look, it would definitely be nice if there were other things out there.
Like we used to have Rove, and you did Rove a couple of times.
Yeah. But it needs to be good. Whatever they do, it needs to be good. I just don't know in this current environment if there's anything kind of bubbling away. Like, I could be wrong, but, Dirty Laundry Live is kind of the perfect conduit for that kind of thing. I don't know, like The Project is, I think The Project's really kicking goals now with, especially with Waleed as one of the main hosts. And we're also in fine form with Charlie Pickering being able to do more comedic stuff with his new show, which I think is fantastic. But, I don't know. As I said, with the way social media is now, if you're diligent and you're on top of it, you can kind of create your own buzz without having to worry about TV and things like that. So unless the show comes along that's really, really good, I think we're better off without having something that's average, if that makes sense.
True. So if they were going to start up a talk show, who would be your ideal host?
I've
heard a few people say Sean McAuliffe would be a good one. Who would you pick?
Or
would you pick yourself?
No, I wouldn't be... I don't know. Who would make a good talk show host?
Joel Creasy's come out and said he'd do it, which would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure Joel would do it. He would. I think that would really suit him, actually. Yeah, probably Joel. I think that's something that he would like to do. So if that's what he's working towards, I could see him excelling at that.
What's next? What have you got on for the rest of the year to look forward to?
Oh, well, it's I'm about to go and do gigs up in Sydney, and then I've got another little tour with Tom Gleeson in regional South Australia in September. We've got The Shelf, which is the comedy variety show that I produce and co-host. We've got our 12th season coming up at the Toffin Town, and that is not far away, actually. That is mid-August. So that's going to be on the 17th, 24th and 31st of August, and it's actually almost sold out, but a few tickets left for those three shows. And then it's, you've got to start thinking about the festivals next year if you want to do the festivals, and if so, what you're going to do for them. So, yeah, there's a fair bit coming up.
Do you have a title for your show next year?
I have a few titles, but we're I'm playing around with them at the moment. I'll see what the material is, and then find out which title suits best.
And finally, where can people find you? So social media, your website, your podcast, shoot.
Yeah, the website is justinhamilton.com.au. The Twitter handle is justinhamilton_. You can find me on Facebook at my official Facebook page. And you can find the podcast, Can You Take This Photo Please, at the site and on iTunes.
So I'm just having a little giggle at that name.
Yeah.
Do you still giggle at it? Do you still giggle at it?
Yeah, I still get a kick out of it. And as I said, especially when people get me to take the photos and then tag me in it, that always makes me laugh.
I'll send you a picture of the cover of Fred Stoller's book. So
yes,
I'll send you that later on today or sometime tomorrow. Justin, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for talking to me and detailing your story through the industry. It's been through the industry. It's been fun. And good luck for the rest of the year. And I'll try and get a ticket to your show next year.
All right, that sounds good, mate. We can sort something out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.